Hello. The title of this talk is, why don't we just call it Meditation Buddhism? Or even, we can go even further and say, why don't we just call it the way of meditation? We can go that far. And although the title of this talk was a question, I don't really have an answer. But that's what I want to go over in this talk right now. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about the school of Buddhism that in Japan is called Zen, and in China was called Chan. Okay? It's the same. It's an evolution of the same school. In the West, we usually just call it Zen because Zen was the first of this tradition to come to the West. So we usually just call it Zen. That's why Thich Nhat Hanh calls what he teaches Zen, even though he's not from Japan, he's from Vietnam. And Master Seung San called what he taught Zen, even though he was from Korea, not Japan. It just all gets called Zen a lot of the time. And I think, so when I say, why don't we call it Meditation Buddhism? Well, what I'm saying is, well, that's confusing. If you know just a little bit, but not too much, then you could easily get confused, right? So what we're talking about is a school of Buddhism that appeared in China in the 3rd century. And they called it Chan Buddhism. Chan means meditation. So really this term came about because people wanted to describe those Buddhists over there who are meditating, right? So we called them Chan Buddhists. We called them those Buddhists over there who meditated. Now, if you know a little bit, you probably think, well, that's what Buddhists do, right? Buddhists meditate. So isn't most of Buddhism meditation Buddhism? And the truth is that no, there's a lot of Buddhists that don't meditate. And especially back in those days, there were a lot of Buddhists that didn't meditate. So it was kind of controversial when these people in China practiced Buddhism and centered their practice on meditation. It's a tradition that arose to try to go back to the original practice of the Buddha. Because by this time, lots of people were worshiping the Buddha. Instead of doing what the Buddha did, they were worshiping him as like a deity, like a god. Or other people were doing things like memorizing texts or endlessly chanting, things like that. Things that are fine, but they weren't the practice the Buddha did. They were doing these things instead of meditating. So this movement arose in China to do the practice of meditation, to do the practice the Buddha did, so that we could attain what the Buddha attained, right? That's the point. This isn't about the Buddha's spiritual journey, it's about ours. And if we remember that it's not about his, that it's about ours, then I think we're in a better spot. And so what we're doing is training in concentration and awareness. We're meditating, we're doing what the Buddha did. And that is what the Zen path is centered on. So we could just call it Meditation Buddhism. And I mean, we don't, because with a few exceptions, if you go to any Western Buddhist community, there's a few exceptions, but for the most part, they're going to meditate. They're going to teach you meditation. They're going to have guided meditations too. They're meditators, right? In Western Buddhism, for the most part, there's some exceptions, but for the most part, they are meditators. So if we called it Meditation Buddhism, it doesn't necessarily make sense. Because a lot of these Buddhist traditions that left meditation behind, they brought it back. But the Chan tradition, the Zen tradition, arose in a time and place when people were not meditating. There's a story that I'm going to briefly tell you. It's a legend. It's myth-making. It's almost certainly not true. Okay? But the story is that the Buddha, during his life, he went up on a mountain called Vulture Peak, and he stood up there, and there was a crowd, because he had a crowd around him all the time, because people loved hearing his teachings. There was a crowd around, and they were expecting a teaching. That was how it happened a lot of the time in those days. The Buddha would just stand up in front of a crowd and give a teaching, and then they would memorize that, and it would become a sacred text, right? And at this time and place, the story goes, the people had this big expectation of having a really special teaching from the Buddha, and he didn't give a teaching. He just held up a flower and he was silent. And so these people, they thought, well, what the heck, man? We came here for something real, something special. So they were disappointed or confused, at best confused, right? Except for there was one student named Mahakasyapa. Sometimes he's just called Kasyapa. But this one student, he saw that flower and he smiled. And the story goes that because he smiled, the Buddha made him his successor and the leader of a secret new teaching, which was the Dhyana tradition, which went to China, became the Chan tradition, which went to Japan and became the Zen tradition. Because he just saw the flower and he just smiled because a flower's pretty. That was it. That was supposed to be a teaching. The Buddha was saying, effectively he was not saying, but he was saying, drop your expectations. Everything you need is right here. So he was teaching via silence and holding up a flower. He was teaching in that way. And supposedly only one student got it and the rest of them thought it was ridiculous. So the story goes that they say the Buddha named Mahakasyapa his successor. A lot of the historical record tells us the Buddha did not name a successor, period. So there's a lot in that story that we can gain from, but historically it's almost certainly not true. It's almost certainly true that the meditation tradition of Buddhism, the Meditation Buddhism or Chan, arose in China. It was not an unbroken tradition that the Buddha passed on by raising a flower. That's almost certainly not true. But what is true, what I think is true, is this. Early Buddhism was rooted in a calming meditation practice, calming and stabilizing the mind. This helps us start to see our true selves, and when we can do that, that opens us up to the path of wisdom. So this calming and stabilizing meditation, when this practice was taken by teachers to China, that's when the Chan tradition arose. Because these teachers of this calming and stabilizing meditation practice, they got to China and they saw meditation was really not happening. Other forms had arisen in China because Buddhism had been there for hundreds of years already, and other forms of worshiping the Buddha, and forms of chanting the Buddha's name, and forms of just memorizing teachings, and forms of, there was one branch of Buddhism where it really sounds like all they did was study sutras and name categories and just put the sutras in categories and just try to find the best way to categorize these texts, which sounds really weird, and that's a branch of Buddhism that didn't really go on that far, although it's also said that the Chan tradition was influenced and shaped by some of what these earlier traditions in China were doing. So a lot of Chan philosophy can be traced back to Tiantai or Huayan Buddhism, which are ones that haven't really taken off in the West, haven't really come here, and don't really have a lot of followers back there either. So, but there was influence, because one of the things about Buddhism is everywhere it goes, it's influenced by the local culture, and that's kind of how Buddhism has survived to the modern age, because Buddhists historically have not always done what other religions have done, which is conquer people and force them to convert. Buddhism doesn't do that. In Buddhism, we don't even ask people to convert, let alone force them, right? So, but one of the ways that it has survived as a world religion is by adapting. So, when the teachers of this calming and stabilizing meditation practice traveled to China, and they saw people weren't really meditating there, they adapted a little. And they listened to not only not only Buddhists from traditions that were already there, like Huayan and Tiantai, but also they listened to Taoist teachers too, and they sort of learned how to speak the language of the people in the area where they were, because Chinese culture and Indian culture are very different. It's said that there was a teacher named Bodhidharma, and he specifically was the first one, and he traveled from India to China to teach, and he discovered the Buddhists there not meditating, and he dedicated himself to encouraging meditation practice, to bringing this practice to people that never even did it before. But he did something else too, and that is he showed them how to do the practice. He went around teaching, and he showed to everyone that would see, and he also taught a key Buddhist concept, and that is Buddha nature, or that is that wakefulness is part of our nature. It's part of our nature. We can all attain enlightenment. And why that's important is because it reminds us that everyone has this wakeful nature. And because we all have this nature, no one's left out. No one's left out. We can all attain enlightenment. That is for everyone. It's not for some select few people. It's not for the people that have enough time to dedicate all of their lives to meditation. It's not just for the people that have enough wealth to give lots of offerings or to build many statues and temples. No. It's your true nature. It's for everyone. And that was the message that Bodhidharma carried with him. That, and you guys should just sit and meditate. There's a story about him sitting in a cave and practicing for 9 years, and I'll save that for another time, but there are stories like that of him doing incredible things. It's said that he invented tea, but the point is, the important thing he did was he taught people about our awakened true nature, and he showed people how to sit and meditate. And a lot of what's in the Zen tradition really just goes back to Bodhidharma's teachings. And a lot of the other Zen teachings are really just commentary on what Bodhidharma said. He was a really important figure. He's semi-mythical, but a very important figure, and probably someone that did exist. There are 4 key concepts to the teaching that Bodhidharma and that the earliest meditation teachers in China taught. And these 4 key concepts are faith, understanding, practice, and realization. So, first of all, faith. When I talk about faith, you probably have things appearing in your head because we have baggage around this word, but we're talking about faith in ourselves. We're talking about believing we can do this, and believing that this path is doing something good for us. That's the kind of faith we're talking about. We're not talking about faith in spirits or faith in God or life after death. We're talking about really faith in ourselves, and to an extent, faith that the path is doing us good, because it is. If we don't have faith in ourselves, or we don't believe in the path all the way, then, we're probably not going to be that diligent in our practice, right? So second is understanding. Understanding is more philosophical. It is studying, learning about where these teachings come from, learning about how these teachings go together, why we're doing this. That's what understanding is. And then practice is putting our belief into action. So without practice, we could just be philosophers. We could just be people that think Buddhism's really cool and learn a lot about it, and read everything about it, and not really do it. We could do that, and definitely some people do that. Sometimes I'm guilty of that. I love to study Buddhism a lot, so I've probably spent more time studying than practicing, and I want to kind of maybe bring that into line a little bit. And then last is realization. Realization is enlightenment. It's learning how to move through the world in a more awakened way. So, without faith, we won't understand. Without understanding, we won't practice. And without practice, we're not going to realize our true nature. So these 4 things taken together create the path. practice involves meditation, which can be uncomfortable, boring, and even painful. We calm the mind with meditation practice, and when the mind is calm, things become clear. And when things are clear, then we can lessen the hold of these delusions and neuroses that are dominating our lives. We can lessen the hold of these delusions and neuroses that are dominating our lives. And that's what this is all about. This is about overcoming our delusions. It's about seeing clearly. It's about calming the mind. It's about all these things. And that's really what we're trying to do here. I'm going to read to you now from a book, and I hope that's okay. This is called Attaining the Way by Chan Master Sheng Yen, and I'm going to read to you from it, and then after that we will be finished for the day. Sheng Yen said, "While Chan is not the only way to cultivate Buddhism, it is the essence or common ground of all practices. What I mean is that it's not only established on ethical living and stability of mind, but also it takes as its goal the blossoming of enlightenment, the full realization of wisdom and compassion. From the time of the Buddha, all bodhisattvas, Chan masters, and sincere practitioners have trod this path. Because there is no single fixed method called Chan, various methods have been embraced by Chan, including reciting a Buddha's name, mantras, prostrations, and studying scriptures. Chan is neither limited to sitting nor separate from daily life. If any of the methods is used to the point where the mind is settled and focused, then with the guidance of a master, methods like Huato or silent illumination can be used to generate wisdom. Once genuine wisdom is experienced, the letting go of body and mind and the world, confidence will become firm, character will be improved, and compassion will be free from conditions." So, maybe I do have an answer. Why isn't it called Meditation Buddhism? Why don't we call it Meditation Buddhism? It sounds like that would be easy. But it's more than that. It's more than that, because we're not meditating just to make our minds a little bit sharper. We're not meditating just to suffer a little bit less, right? We are taking as our goal learning how to live in a more awakened way. We are meditating to awaken. So, I guess that's all I want to go over today. So I hope I've shed some light. I know it gets so confusing, the words Chan and Zen. I once had someone say to me that they were turned off whenever they started to hear us talking in foreign words. She said, "Can we get beyond that? Can we get beyond throwing out foreign words? Because throwing out foreign words, maybe it does turn some people off, right? Maybe it does scare some people away." And I think the word Zen has almost stopped being a foreign word. Almost, right? You say the word Zen and people kind of have an idea of what you mean. They may have some incorrect assumptions about it, but they may kind of have an idea. Whereas other words like Chan kind of has a way to go. And then words like Bodhisattva probably have a long way to go. So that's why a lot of teachers are just going to use the word Zen. And that's why most of the time I just use the word Zen, because people know it already. I'm not ready to just call it Meditation Buddhism, but that is something I'm contemplating. Because that is what Zen means. It means meditation. That is what Chan means. It means meditation. So thank you for taking the time to listen to me ramble on a little bit. Have a good day. You can say hi. Okay. Okay, and everybody should celebrate that my son James was sitting here with me and really quiet the whole time. Good job, James. Have a good day, everybody.